Since mankind first evolved to walk upright and leave his simian cousins behind, he has overcome innumerable perils exploring the four corners of the Earth. By 1933, only a few blank spots remained. And one for good reason. Here beneath the churning waters of the Indian Ocean is the resting place of what some have called the most hellish place on Earth, Skull Island. Skull Island had long existed as a sailor's legend, passed down by word of mouth and in hastily drawn sketches. No one believed the fantastic tales of prehistoric creatures still roaming the Earth. Skull Island was a complete geological and evolutionary anomaly, a place of inexhaustible mysteries. But when Westerners first arrived on Skull Island in 1933, they found themselves running from giant beasts that up to that point had only been known from the fossil record. Little did scientists suspect that within 15 years, this perversion of evolution, this impossible island, would disappear forever.
The creatures on Skull Island may seem fantastical, but you have to realize that there was obviously a time very recently when the Komodo dragon was discovered. In Asia, they realized that there were these enormous 8 or 9 foot long reptilian creatures that were the stuff of legend.
There are other examples apart from Skull Island of species that have been either thought to be extinct and been rediscovered, or species that could be completely unknown, discovered in the modern age.
Like the coelacanth, a fish that in theory died out hundreds of millions of years ago, living in quite an extended population right up the African coast through Asia.
Gorillas themselves were mythic creatures. They were like the wild man of the forest, and they were in mythology and rumor and speculation for centuries and centuries before they were ever actually seen.
It wasn't until last century, actually 1902 I think it was, that the mountain gorilla was actually finally discovered as a real animal and acknowledged by the Western world that yes, these creatures did exist. As recently as 1992, large new species have been discovered. There was a species of bovid, a cow-like creature discovered in Laos. I mean, that's a large animal. How does an animal that size go undiscovered until now? But we're discovering new animals all the time.
Before Carl Denham's crew landed on Skull Island in 1933, it was common knowledge that dinosaurs had been extinct for 65 million years. The prevailing theory has held that an asteroid collided with the Earth 65 million years ago, fomenting a prolonged global winter. Dinosaurs and 50% of all animal species became extinct. But on one tropical island near what is now Indonesia, that theory runs into gargantuan obstacles.
Skull Island is a remarkable place because somehow, despite all the changes that have affected the rest of the world, this amazing menagerie of creatures have managed to survive intact. So where everywhere else in the world dinosaurs became extinct 65 billion years ago, on Skull Island, by some miracle, they've survived.
How did these Cretaceous-era beasts endure into our time? From 1934 to the start of World War II, a series of expeditions journeyed to Skull Island to unravel this riddle of nature. Ill-prepared for the island's hazards, dozens of scientists met horrific deaths. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined my partner at breakfast, Sir Neville Whitecliffe, would be a dinosaur's lunch not 3 hours later. British Expedition, 1934. The lucky survivors uncovered Skull Island's history of geological instability. Incessant earthquakes had produced massive fissures, which in the days of the dinosaurs housed thermal vents. These geological clues led to a hypothesis about the survival of the dinosaurs. The thermal vents had kept the island temperate, even tropical. While the rest of the Earth was freezing and other species became extinct, Skull Island's jungles were warm and teeming with life. This miracle allowed the giant reptile's evolution to continue unabated for another 65 million years.
The dinosaurs continued to evolve, to become more aggressive, more intelligent, and to diversify into these forms that we don't actually see in paleontology elsewhere.
No longer was the Tyrannosaurus rex the simple hunter of the plains. On Skull Island, it evolved into larger, more ferocious, and more nimble Vastatosaurus rex,
They have very large feet to cope with the uneven and broken terrain of Skull Island, permitting them to weave and jink and move across very uneven and precarious surfaces.
He's got these thinner ribs and hips, which give him more sort of snake-like movement that can help him get through the tighter jungle.
Another terrifying hunter unique to Skull Island was the venatosaur, similar to a velociraptor.
Major difference is that these guys on the island are big. When you think of raptors, you think of something about the size of a lion at the most, whereas these guys are about 20 feet long.
And so this thing had this, amazingly powerful jaws, but he had this really streamlined body, which would make him very, very fast.
Not only dinosaurs lived on Skull Island, but also beasts just as terrible, or even worse. Lurking in the deep crevasses of the island were discovered at great human cost some of the vilest creatures known to man.
The pit is where creatures fall in. It's a natural predator trap. It's full of rotting carcasses and animals in there. And so therefore you've just got all these scavenger creatures living in this kind of viscous soup at the bottom.
Exploring that pit was like turning over stones in Hades. Spring Expedition, 1937.
In the deep rents and fissures of Skull Island, there's some remarkable species, including the most disturbing Carnictus, which essentially is a giant parasitic worm-like creature that has evolved beyond the need to be a parasite and is much more of an active predator and scavenger itself. Carnictus means the meat weasel, in reference to its writhing, long, linear sort of form.
It's an animatic stomach with some teeth on one end, and it's just this muscle that moves around looking for things to eat.
Perils resided not only in the depths of the island, but in the skies as well, where the terrifying Pteropus mordax ruled.
The flying creature, the Pteropus mordax, is just essentially a big flying rodent. It has the similar body plan to a pterodactyl in some ways, except for the legs, and it fulfills the same function. It's the same kind of creature.
I think their basic, lifestyle is pretty similar to a bat. They seem to spend the day in caves hanging upside down from a roof.
It's just hell with wings. It's just pus and disgusting, flying around the place.
The Pteropus mordax caves were on the highest peaks of Skull Island. Also living on these mountaintops was a species of giant gorilla known as Megapromatus Kong. If I had to live anywhere on this godforsaken rock, it would be high, in those hills, way above that hell of a jungle. Leave it to the monkey to get it right. Fall Expedition, 1936.
Kong's origins are shrouded in mystery, and where they came from is completely open to interpretation. They certainly weren't there since the Cretaceous period, since apes of any kind hadn't really evolved back then. So they obviously are an example of a species that's gotten there more recently. Whether they evolved on the island itself or whether they were introduced from somewhere else, again, is really open to speculation.
Possibly Kong's lineage stems from Asia, from Gigantopithecus, which is a huge ape ancestor that they found fossil records of in Asia.
Gigantopithecus was certainly a good 2 to 3 times the size of a modern gorilla, but even that is quite a leap to go from that to the size of Kong, who's the size of a house.
Despite their enormity, these gorillas were still simian to the core.
They're all very socially adept creatures, and whether it's a relationship solely with your mum and siblings or whether it's a whole troop, rely on other individuals around you, not only for protection but for cleanliness and for mental stability.
But the giant apes were not the only social primates on the island. Excavations discovered that miraculously, about 3,000 years ago, a highly developed civilization had established itself.
The island was once populated by a very sophisticated and advanced race of people, maybe around the level of, let's say, the Inca.
It would have been a civilization sort of on a par with ancient Egypt or the Hittites or Sumerians.
It was a major civilization that had its own architecture and its own style with a spiritual background.
What we do know is that they were heavily into human sacrifice, that there was a cult of the dead.
The ancient race from Skull Island had revered their dead and had kept their skulls and put them on display as part of their religion, I guess. And underground they had great catacombs and stacks of skeletal body parts.
Most of the buildings of Skull Island have perished and been overgrown by the jungle, but the ones that survived show that they had a very sophisticated building method.
They built large temples, huge stone structures.
The building styles mirror, say, Nan Madol up in Micronesia, where you've got these structures, sort of walled compounds, in effect, made from crystal basalt logs.
Basalt geometric rods of stone, maybe 2 to 3 meters long. And the great benefit of these was they'd almost work like pickup sticks. They had the ability to sort of weave them into each other to be able to build much more extroverted structures in their architecture.
The ancient race constructed a city on the highest part of the island. This acropolis was surrounded by a massive wall that was once 24 miles in diameter.
When it was originally built, it was to protect the ancient civilization from all of the things that might threaten it, which would include dinosaurs and huge gorillas and various other things.
We can see from the shape of the wall that it would have really been very, very extensive, which suggests there was a huge city there.
But the ancient civilization was doomed. Just over 1,000 years ago, Skull Island's routine earthquakes intensified with disastrous consequences.
The earthquakes began to erode the island, and the island began to sink.
This very big piece of landmass has been progressively dropping into the sea, and now all we're left with is the very tip of this landmass that's jutting out as an island.
So all of the creatures who once survived in a much bigger piece of land have now been shunted into the middle as the island sinks and the coast comes in.
The predators were packed into a much smaller territory with a large reduction in available food biomass.
So there's a great deal more conflict on the island than you typically see around the world in various natural unaffected ecosystems.
The whole place is falling to bits. The ecosystem's falling to bits. Maybe that's why there's too many predators on the island, because, there's just not enough room for everything to live.
The carnivores naturally looked to a new food supply, the humans of the city. And the humans' only protection failed as the earthquakes continued to wreak havoc on the massive wall.
The walls began to collapse, allowing the animals, the giant creatures, into the inner sanctum of the city.
And the humans simply lost. The humans were the weakest of the species and they were killed off.
They might have actually left the island. They might have taken off and settled somewhere else. We're not sure. We might even be descended from them ourselves.
All that exists of this incredible race of humans are the old ruins, the wall and some of the temples and things that you see on the interior of the island, overgrown.
But the story of humans living on Skull Island was not yet over. When the island was discovered by the Western world in the 1930s, they found a small group of desperate souls eking out the barest existence possible.
The current inhabitants of Skull Island are probably the descendants of people who were shipwrecked on the island.
A race of islanders, a sort of a Melanesian, Micronesian society.
They're very much a hunter-gatherer people. It looks like that is part of their historical culture.
Their only clothing is the hair that they grow on their heads. All of their clothing is knotted out of their own human hair. They have lost the primitive techniques of weaving and only can use crude knotting to create these garments.
They're scavengers. They basically live on birds' eggs, fish, crustaceans.
They have managed to survive clinging to this tiny fragment of land.
And the only thing that was protecting them from the dinosaurs, the monsters, the things that would kill them was this wall, and so this great big ancient wall which went out of the sea on one side, across this peninsula on the island and into the sea on the other side. And so they were confined to a very small part of the island. Beyond the wall is all lush jungle and tropical rainforest, but on their side of the wall, it's been picked clean.
There's no greenery left. It's just this crude, hard rock forms that they live in amongst.
It's not easy.
To see mankind reduced to such a state, rodent-like, fearful and small, is humbling. Man is no hunter here, he is prey. Fall Expedition, 1935. In an intriguing parallel with 1st century Jerusalem, the ancient people of Skull Island had buried their dead outside the city's protective wall. Since the modern Skull Islanders lacked any construction materials or skills, the only safe dwelling that they could find was in these ancient tombs, amongst the bones of the long gone.
They're being hunted themselves, so they live as much as possible in the old tombs. It's almost a subterranean existence.
And they have come to worship the giant gorilla as some sort of god, and they practice human sacrifice to appease this giant gorilla.
It is well documented that Kong was trapped and removed from Skull Island by Carl Denham's 1933 expedition. What Denham learned upon his 1935 return was that Kong had been the last of his kind. Megapromatus Kong's extinction resulted from a combination of nature's wrath and the weaponry of modern man. Upon the outbreak of World War II, the scientific expeditions halted. In 1948, as the first post-war expedition was en route, a massive earthquake registering 9.2 on the Richter scale proved to be too forceful for the weakened outcrop of prehistoric wonder. The very geological instability that had produced the thermal vents that enabled the dinosaurs to survive had now led to the island's demise. Much like the legendary lands of Atlantis and Lemuria, Skull Island vanished beneath the waves. But unlike those imaginary civilizations, Skull Island was explored by modern man, and many lives were lost in the meeting.
It's good to be home.
We heard they needed us, so we flew in. Take care of business. We're here. Everybody's warmed up, ready. I'm excited to be here to see all the peeps again.
Like a big boy.
Here we are, team starting to assemble.
We're actually ready with lighting.
We're ready with lighting, we're ready to shoot. We've just got them off the plane and we're ready to shoot.
Come on!
Yep, that's how it was. Boom.
What's special about today is I'm here with all my friends and we've got some nice rocks, still photographer, crew everywhere.
This is the earliest I've been up in 4 months.
Wave, say hi, we're back. Good. See, that's what's special about today because we're all here.
That's gonna help bring it back.
I don't feel like we have left. I feel like I've been in this hold the whole time saying compliment to the chef.
Compliment to the chef. Oh God!
I've been in this cage the whole time, so I really haven't accomplished much.
I'm psyched that we're doing the pickups because I think I've gotten better as an actor. And I think I'm going to blow Pete away with some of my new acting techniques I'm going to bust out. Hold up.
Wait.
I hope I look exactly like I did back then. I think it was like 3 years ago we first shot this scene.
So what we've done is we've gone through the scenes that we've shot already, and we're just going to stick in little pieces, and occasionally we're going to shoot a new scene. Okay, nerves rattled, looking around.
So this is what the well-dressed man in the jungle should be wearing. The gun, the knife, the rope, the hat, the slicker.
It was constantly like this with Brophy over here while shooting. He was just consistently looking for attention.
He's right.
Next setup.
Move.
Everyone's running around getting ready. It's been a few months since we were last on the set shooting.
We assume that Jamie is kind of, hanging on with something like this.
Yeah.
I love my job. Roll out of bed, roll onto a tree.
We should just do one more grab bag. So that was pretty good. Almost at the end of our first day of pickup shooting. Going well. Back in the jungles of Skull Island.
And action.
This time, it's a really interesting part of shooting because obviously, there's part of you that would love to shoot,
weeks and weeks and weeks to pick up something. Why wouldn't you? Because there's always so many new ideas. But we're pretty pleased with this film. It's a fairly tight, linear piece of storytelling.
And cut.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry we broke you on our first day. We'll get worse.
Well, we're still on pickups, and today we are going to spend some time with the venture crew. Of course, venture crew have had to go through a severe boot camp in which they learn the art of waiting, because after all, that's what a good crew member does. They sit around, they do nothing except drink tea, eat biscuits and smoke cigarettes.
Hey, Marco.
It's 11 o'clock and we're here to do pickups today. I'm not sure what stage we're working on. I think we're maybe on the boat. This is Trailer Park. This is where the stars live. We go around here where the stars don't live.
Get in there, you. I'm just processing through makeup and wardrobe. Okay, somebody must be ready for makeup by now.
Right.
Oh, good on you, Jed. He's well known as the quickest one out of them all. More ways than one.
Sometimes I'm not that quick.
I'm going to be half moustache man.
Hello there.
What do you think?
And we get into our costumes and our makeup, and then they tell us what scene we're doing, and we get on set and we put on our gear with its guns and ropes and whatever other stuff we've got. The rope's on the wrong side. I'll have to change it over.
No, that's wrong.
That's exactly how it went before.
And there we go.
We are ready to go at a moment's notice.
That's right.
Shouldn't be too far away, gentlemen. Seems to be a little unsure who may be required at this stage.
You. Is it on each letter now? Move in and out.
You move in.
Nice shot. Oh, sneaky bugger.
Have you even acted yet today?
No.
So we're just taking Lee Hartley down to the 80s Portacom to stand by for digital mapping of his face.
My pimple's going to be digitised for eternity.
Bastards!
Tripping into somebody putting...
the old porridge.
I mean, if we were in tight, we may not see it.
Please.
I'm just flipping to Lee's thing. I think you'd spoon a dollop into Lee's, then grab the thing and go straight back into shaving again. You know what I mean?
And roll sound.
Speed.
Okay, here we go. And action. Cut. All right, call that.
Closing one eye, smoking a fag, making the boat move,
something else. I couldn't remember.
making the boat move, shaving with my left hand, stirring with my right. It's all. This is my bête noire scene.
It's 4:30. We've been here since 11:30.
Shouldn't be too far away, guys.
For the last 5 hours, we're sat around in costume having amazing conversations with each other about brilliant things.
So I've got my Tenacious D album and I was going to get Jack to sign it.
Is that right?
And that's a wrap, folks. Thank you very much.
And that's the word. We can wrap everybody else still in the cafe.
Sorry, guys. Unfortunately, you are wrapped.
Oh, here he is. Apparently they're a little mad because you got to go on set twice today.
Actually three times. I've been there since 8 o'clock this morning. And I had a line.
You had a line, did you? Oh, good line with we're trained on set.
Day's over. Get porridge smeared in my face, along with shaving cream up my nostrils. It was good. It was good fun.
Okay, yeah. I look like Andy in his suit.
Right, see you tomorrow. Thanks very much. Bye. Thanks. So it's a day in the life of a glorified featured extra. We didn't get on set today. We sat around, played ping pong, ate food, had a good time, and now we're going home.
So we're about 3 months from the end of miniatures construction. We're working on the approach to Skull Island.
The dynamic environments of Skull Island have been predominantly created through the use of miniatures, and therefore it's great to have an opportunity to show you the journey that a miniature goes through here at the workshop.
we read the script and then you guys can illustrate some sort of more of a feeling of the action from the script.
As is always the case, our design work starts with the script, an initial chat with Peter, but then on to our conceptual designers, Gus and Jeremy, begin creating beautiful artwork that further enhance Peter's vision for the film. Once these are finally approved and we've singled out 1 or 2 paintings that best capture that vision, we then create a 3-dimensional maquette.
Peter said to us, make that painting. So that primarily is what we're doing.
I made this maquette for Peter to look at nearly a year ago.
But it just sits in storage up on the shelves waiting till the schedule is relative to when we should start building it. Its time has now arrived, so the old maquette is pulled out and we begin work on it. We literally slice this little miniature up to give us the information to build the larger scale model. We scale up either by hand off this model, but in recent times also utilising the previs department to drive our shopbot, a robotic routing table, which automatically cuts out the profiles.
Once we've got the outline, which is just really bones, we get a skeleton, and we've got to add all the skin and the detail, like this architectural detail, that we've got to just look at the maquette and take measurements and try and recreate in between each profile.
This is the area we're working on right now. It's the floor panels. We're translating that onto the actual model. And after this, we're going to start building the facade of the buildings, which is this area on the maquette right here. It's not going to be as detailed as this, so it's going to be more like cave dwellings.
The guys have created these massive angular rocks, and the feeling that the seismic eruption that's hitting the island is making everything fall out of parallel, and I think we've really captured that in this latest miniature.
We clad rock that we've moulded from real rock around the coastline of Wellington and throughout New Zealand.
We have different names for the different sorts of rock. Probably the easiest one to identify is James Brown here, so named for all the grooves that it has in it. Charlie Parker, better known as Bird, and we call it Bird just because it's so goddamn interesting.
Louis Armstrong is smooth with gravelly undertones.
Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk. This is one of the early Rolling Stones.
We skewer it on using meat skewers or shish kebab sticks, and then using urethane foam, we actually foam those rock surfaces on, go back in with a knife, cut pieces out, tilt them, change them, squash them, stretch them, to try and make a more dynamic environment. Then we try and get Peter in to have a look at it. It's a good stage for him to make alterations if he wishes, because it's very simple still to move it around. Very thankfully, in the case of the miniatures for Kong, he's actually had very few changes. He's been very satisfied with where we've taken the miniatures, and it's allowed the process to move ahead at incredible pace. But for me personally, I think the most satisfying thing that I now get out of my job is really watching these exceptionally talented artists create all these neat things. You're working with a group of people that have an unabashed enthusiasm, a passion and a drive to just achieve really great results all of the time, and that's a good place to be.
So, 32 weeks to go, and here I am in the sunshine with the Venture. This is the full-size Venture, which I didn't actually ever film on this Venture due to reasons associated with seasickness, but there were many different Ventures in the movie. I got to shoot on the full-size set that we had in the parking lot.
Very busy and chaotic tonight. There's partial Ventures in the sense that there was the full upper deck built at Stone Street Studios, and then of course all the cabins and holds and so forth. And then in terms of the entire ship, there's 3. There's the full-size ship, which is built from a little coaster called the Manuia. Then there's our 12th scale model here, and then there's a tiny little one that we're using for extreme long shots.
And at the moment we're shooting the miniature Venture, a wonderful, incredibly detailed miniature that Weta Workshop have made, and Alex Funky and his great team are busy shooting the miniature ship on the stage.
Well, you always want to use the right tool for the job. If you want to do a shot of the Venture steaming into the sunrise, it'd be great if you could simply take a full-size ship out and steam it into the sunrise and film it from a helicopter. But if you have to have a ship in a storm, if you have to have a ship that's in danger, that's in extreme waves and so forth, well, that's very hard to film and very dangerous. It's much more practical to do that on a miniature, which is how our 12th scale miniature comes into play.
Our miniature at 12 scale is 14 foot long
some of the storyboarded shots go extremely close to the surface of it, and therefore it has to be an extremely detailed model.
There are miniatures in the world that get built. Okay, 2.5 hours, I got to mount 800 rivets on this boat and then I can go home. Those are the miniatures that don't work. The miniatures that work are the ones where everything that's done was done by somebody who had a story to tell. What's the last time that they washed the deck? What was on the deck at that time? Was it animal droppings? Was it rust? Why are these rivets rustier than those? Because water trickles down off the lifeboat davit and runs on this post, so there's more water here, so it rusts more. But that's the kind of thinking that makes a good miniature builder.
One of the coolest things that bring miniatures to life is the lighting on them.
On the miniature venture, we've got all the lights that were on the real venture, all the bulkhead lights and the spotlights and the running lights and so forth. But we want to keep those as a separate piece of film. That's because we need to be able to, when we put the shot together, adjust the brightness relatively of all these different components. So that gets a piece of film that's just black except for just those little points of light, portholes and everything else. Here's a practical, one of the little scale practical lights. It's a waterproof bulkhead fixture. But as you see, it doesn't do much. But, okay, turn that on, please. We have an effects light which creates the glow that surrounds the lamp. So see, that way the two together produce the total effect. As with anything else in miniature photography, it's all cheating. It's all faking something so that it looks the way it does in the real world.
One of the tricky things with a miniature ship is not just making the ship look good and lighting it and shooting it. You've actually got to have the ship moving. It's one of those things that if it's not moving properly, you're going to notice it. It's going to give away the whole trick.
In the course of working out the ship's movement, a great deal of study was done by the digital guys and by our guys as well, looking at lots and lots of documentary footage of ships in different kinds of seas to look at things like how many degrees per second does a ship in a moderate sea roll.
So by using a very simple counterweight process, we can find the waterline of the model and mount the axis point through the waterline. And then as you can see here, just with the slightest of touches, I can actually get the ship rocking.
The three motions that a ship has are pitch, which is to say rising and falling the bow and the stern, yaw, which is turning, and roll, which is motion from side to side. So we need to have all three of those motions in this ship.
The only thing we can't do is vertical raise and lower, and they'll achieve that by using the camera. So hopefully next time you see it, it will be bobbing around in the ocean just off Skull Island, and if these people have done their jobs right, there hopefully won't be any way you can tell it apart from the real ship. So it's certainly a very, very enjoyable opportunity that Kong has offered us building this ship.
Mocap. Hi there, it's Andy Serkis and welcome to the Motion Capture Studio. It's just a warehouse really, but we've converted it into this rather marvellous high-tech space. When I think of the fact that principal photography has come to an end, it doesn't seem like that in any sense, way, shape or form, because we're actually shooting principal photography on Kong now.
Each morning when Andy comes in, we put him into his famous blue lycra suit, which I'll have you know isn't a special sensor suit. He doesn't wear special sensors, isn't wired up, it's just a plain lycra suit. And we put these markers on it, and the markers are little plastic balls with scotch tape wrapped around them, bright reflective scotch tape.
I could just turn it off now.
All they're designed for is to reflect the light back towards the camera. And we've got 52 cameras that track the body, and another 20 that are specially designed to track the face. Now each one of our motion capture cameras has a bright ring light around it that will shine bright light out. So as soon as they hit one of the reflective markers, it fires straight back at the camera. So it gets a single bright dot for each one of the markers that it tracks around.
I'm lit up like a Christmas tree, and that's fed into the computer, and that data is recorded. So if there's a movement, you'll see all those cameras pick up that movement.
So Andy's suit has about 60 markers on it, so between all the different cameras you can actually track the dot in 3D. So once we capture the marker cloud, which represents where Andy is, we map that onto a human body that moves around our screen. And from there we have a char map that maps a character onto whatever target we want, in this case Kong. And Kong of course has got very different proportions to Andy.
The biggest challenges we're going to have is going to be retargeting Andy's motion onto Kong, because they are built so different.
All these dots are assigned to specific markers on the Kong CG puppet. That's me. Because I really am as ripped as that little guy.
So this next process will map the human motion that Andy provides onto Kong. So as Andy's actually acting this out, we get to see Kong on the screen, and that's shown in real time to the directors who are watching it from the different camera angles we're going to use for the actual shot. So they can see in a second if Andy's performance as Kong is going to match the shot that they want.
And that's the beauty of having real-time playback, is that you can actually learn about the character and the way you're puppeteering that character. As it, you know, you can come back and look at it immediately, and then your emotional memory kind of goes, right, okay, that works or that doesn't work, and you make the adjustments.
There's some kind of cool moves that are interesting in there, where you're trying to, some of this stuff is looking kind of neat.
What we're discovering here is a lot of the writing of the character, a lot of the understanding of the character. It's a very physical space, it's a very experimental space. Philippa and Fran are in here rewriting scenes on the hoof all the time. We are here judging what is going to be dramatically appropriate. It's quite a tough challenge.
Working with Andy is really fantastic. I worked with him on the last 2 Lord of the Rings films as well, and he just brings a certain levity, shall we say, to the studio. He's certainly no airs and graces. He's really interested in everybody on the set. He has lunch with us, he hangs out with us. He's a great guy to work with, and he's just so professional on set. He just totally gets into the character of Kong before each take. He knows his gorillas inside out.
In a sense, there is no difference between motion capture and proper normal acting. Any actor could do what I'm doing, and the way I would research a role or try and find a psychology for a character or try and find a physicality for a character, there is no difference. And I think this process will actually become part of an actor's toolkit to be able to get up and do this kind of work. It just happens to be new at the moment.
Hello. This greeting comes from the editorial couch. Finally made it through the shoot, and we're in post-production, and I get to sit in my favourite position on the couch at editorial. So, welcome to the first of our post-production diaries. Obviously we can't talk about how many days shooting we've had because we're now into post-production, but we are exactly 33 weeks away from the release of the movie on December 14th. So we thought we'd count these down. 33 is a special number because obviously the original King Kong was made in 1933. During these post-production diaries, we'll spend some time with each of the post-production departments. There's obviously the editorial department, the digital effects department, Weta Digital, Weta Workshop. We also have a film unit that is shooting, which is the Minis unit. We have the motion capture department. The sound department is starting up. And then eventually, at the very end, we'll have the finishing of the film with the colour timing and the sound mixing. But right now, we thought we should give you an overview so you can see what different departments are doing 33 weeks away from the release of the film.
Really excited now to getting onto it because it has been pretty tricky while Pete's been doing the shooting, so it's really good to get full attention from him. So hopefully we'll move along really fast with the aims to try and get a good sort of structure of the movie done during the next 2 or 3 months, just to see how it's pacing out. God, just splitting this up is a bloody mission in itself, isn't it?
Get as much of an idea of how the movie's working as a story so that Peter and Fran and Philippa can think about anything extra that might be needed.
What we're tending to do now is just actually kind of getting into sort of the nitty-gritty scenes where we can actually turn over a few really complicated effect shots to Weta. Obviously they need more and more effect shots to get through the system.
Once the shots are turned over, it's feeding Weta Digital with work in a sensible way that all the big stuff's not left to the end when there's no time. But certainly the volume of work that we're putting through the place with all the different departments is definitely increased now that we've stopped shooting, because now that Peter's cutting, the material's going to start flying backwards and forwards.
We've got quite a few effect shots to do, somewhere, I don't know, thousands, quite a few to do, and we've got about 8 months left to finish them all, which is somewhat daunting, and we try not to think about it too much, but we'll just keep slamming through it and get there.
On Lord of the Rings, we were completing a miniature maybe every 2.5 to 3 months at the height of production. We've now honed that down to 1.5 weeks per miniature. We've got probably 80 people building miniatures in the workshop at the moment, so it's certainly keeping us busy. We've been building miniatures for 4 stages that Alex Funke's department have been looking after.
We estimate between now and the middle of October we have about between 1,400 and 2,000 shots. So it just means people have to work faster and harder and find better ways to get things done, which we're doing. We've started up another unit, a second miniature unit, basically because there's simply more shots than we can do in one. So basically we split the work down the middle. We'll take half and they'll take half. We lifted off long before production began, and we'll probably still be shooting when they pull the plug at the very end.
We'll probably be motion capturing up, I'd say, maybe going through to August, September maybe, depending on last ditch shots, maybe October. Motion capturing Kong's way harder than Gollum. It's 10 times harder. For Kong, we're doing a full facial capture as well as full body capture. It's very tricky to capture body and facial at the same time.
It's amazing what they can do in films nowadays. It's all that CG that they do.
The sound department, they'll be working on the dialogue for the film and all of the sound effects.
Well, basically right now we're in a period where we're gathering all the effects, the ingredients that we're going to use to cook up this big feast. So we're just recording all the different elements that are going to go into making up the effects end of the soundtrack. Okay.
So welcome to post-production, and during the next 33 weeks we'll show you what each of the departments are doing, and you'll get to see what happens when the pressure really gets on towards the end.
So we're in the cutting room, cutting furiously, 30 weeks to go. And while we're in here editing, we have a team of sound recorders who are basically compiling the type of sound effects that we're going to need for the movie. They don't really have the final cut pictures to work to yet, but they certainly know the type of noises and effects that they're going to need for the finished film.
Well, right now the sound department is very active recording sound effects.
This recording stage that we're in now, this sort of gathering stage, is really fun because there's like this aspect of adventure to it. We're able to get out of the studio into the field.
We have got the right building, eh?
Hold it, Stern! Hold it, Stern!
The steamship recording was really fun. It's crewed by these guys who are all steam enthusiasts, and they were just great.
We're going after all the mechanical engine sounds for the Venture, and a lot of the Venture actual footage has been done with miniatures, so bringing the realistic sound to life is crucial to making it feel real and believable.
We over-recorded this boat. Better to over-record than under-record, we say.
We've had longboat recordings for the Venture crew with everyone rowing.
So we're out in the bay and we're just sort of rowing away, and then we're sort of rocking it, and then we're getting it buffeting against the rocks, and then, meanwhile the art department guys in the bank are looking at this because we're like scraping up all the hull of this thing, and we're taking out chunks from the front of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't include any of that bashing of the boat stuff.
The system will bash us. They're a really good art department. They can fix anything.
You got to suffer for your art, you know.
We're in Wainuiomata. The sound team is here trying to capture the log falls for some of the Kong action through the forest, and we've been dropping these big logs back here. So we're about to drop it in the mud to try and get some big ape or dinosaur body falls in mud.
So often when we go out and record, we don't always know exactly how things are going to turn out. That's definitely going onto the internet.
Off again today, another big trip.
We recorded planes over in the Wairarapa, and that was with a 1939 Harvard.
The right sounding plane, but not necessarily the right looking plane.
The sound is very important in terms of really bringing the images to life. And another thing that sound does is it's working in 3 dimensions. And so when we're doing something like the plane recordings, we're very aware of how this sound is traveling through space.
Creating a 3-dimensional space actually gave us also an opportunity with the guns to record the guns snapping off the various hills.
Primary gun used by the Venture crew.
We can actually feed that into processes which can then recreate how the sound was bouncing around the hills with the sounds kind of flying around you, kind of in the theatre.
Those are sounds which don't necessarily exist in libraries, and even if they did, we probably wouldn't want to use them straight out of libraries because
We would prefer we give the audience a whole brand new track wherever possible, and that's always better.
The sound effects library at the moment is about a half a terabyte. There's around 50,000 sound effects, so there's probably about 100,000 individual files.
And we've got hours and hours of recorded material that I still haven't had a chance to get into the library because we keep going out and recording more.
So it's been full on. It's been a very full on week with more to come.
So we're still in the cutting room with 29 weeks to go, and as you can imagine, we're moving through the vast amounts of footage we have to basically get our movie crafted. And we thought we'd show you this week is what actually happens, not in the cutting room, but all the work behind the scenes of the editorial department that has to go into arranging the footage before it even reaches the cutting room.
I suppose the best way to describe what the editorial team does in terms of the cutting room is that we're a support structure for the creative team, I suppose.
When you're cutting a film, you know, Peter is in there pretty buried each day, going through the material, finding the story and finding the flow of the movie.
They're looking to have everything at their fingertips that they've shot, prepared, expect to have ready when they need it to be able to put a scene together.
The assistant editors sort all the footage that is shot on one camera roll. They'll break that up into scene, break it up into camera, write descriptions about it, about whether it's a wide shot or a close-up, who's in the shot, put all this information into the computer system, and they will send it to us so that we can have it there at our fingertips and find any shot we need.
And out there, yeah.
If our flow doesn't get back into them to let the whole thing turn around and the scenes and therefore the film develop, then the whole thing kind of stalls. So we're the engine room to the bridge. At this stage of production, it's late May. We're a few weeks past the end of main unit shooting. We are still shooting. There are 2 miniatures units shooting film, and there's the mocap stage, motion capture, which is shooting videotape still.
Oh, they're busy dealing with all the mocap stuff. That we're sending the stuff down to be mocap down with Andy, and obviously there's huge amounts of footage coming in for minis. There's about three teams going now on the minis.
Everything has to go into the cutting room through us so that we know where everything is. And that might be main unit, second unit, miniatures, visual effects shots that arrive, previous animation.
There's been hours of footage to go through. And we're just kind of getting it down to sort of like a smaller amount, so we have a more manageable amount of footage.
So far we have about 1.9 terabytes of media on the computers, which equates to nearly 2 million feet of film, or 370 hours of total footage shot. Probably 50 to 60% of that had to have sound synchronised to it. The sound comes in as a lot of separate files, has to be synchronised with picture. Those picture and sound files then get turned into single clips so they don't get lost from each other. All of the shot information gets added to that, so it's got all the information attached to it that it needs.
What I'm doing at the moment is just data entry, really. All the details for every shot, like the slate information, what lenses they used, at what speed, descriptions.
And then that's put through into the cutting room in a way that they can find it, so they're able to lay their hands on everything, cut the scene, and then turn the scene straight back around out the door. And when it comes back out the door, then we're responsible for making sure it goes in the right form to every other department who needs it, to the visual effects department, and therefore onto Weta for them to look at what they need to build for the scene.
Your visual effects keep coming through, updating those all the way through as we're within the cut, so keeping them updated.
The visual effects section of editorial are responsible for turning everything over to Weta to do digital effects and also returning it back into the cut.
One of the biggest challenges working on a film like Kong is keeping Weta fed because of the nature of this film, which is very, very visual effects heavy. And there's a whole lot of guys over at Weta waiting for shots to get on with, so just making sure that everyone is fed with things to do while appreciating the fact that cutting the film of this size and this grandeur will take time.
The other department that we supply, of course, is sound, so that they can begin to have a look and just see what they're in for, or as the scene gets tighter or turns into an actual reel of the film, they can begin to actually do final track laying ready for the mix. Funnily enough, with all the technology that's around us and all the computers and all of the terabytes and all of the visual effects, I think that for me the most exciting part of my job is actually going and seeing anything on the big screen, getting to sit there in the cinema watching all of the shots. That's when you go, oh yeah, okay, that's what it's about.
So, 28 weeks to go, and we're here cutting like crazy. We thought this week it would be good to catch up on some of your questions. So, Theo, you asked, why did you decide to set your remake in the 1930s and not in modern times? There's two answers to that question. The one main answer is because I wanted to do the sequence with Kong fighting the biplanes on top of the Empire State Building.
That is such an iconic movie moment. You know, I couldn't imagine anything being called King Kong and not including that sequence. I think the other reason is it's the last age of exploration, if you like. It's the final time period in which there could be those slight blank spots on the atlas. Greg has asked one of these clever questions which has different parts to it. He says, when directing a scene, what do you look for? How do you know when you've got what you want? And how many takes do you usually like to do? Well, there is no real secret to what you're doing. What happens is that everything comes off the script. And really, in a script, a scene is there for a particular reason.
It's all in the eyes of Kong.
And so the critical thing is to identify the reason that this scene exists.
Have you ever heard of Kong? Anyone going, no, we're going there. And so suddenly you're on the adventure.
You then base the design of the sequence, the blocking of the actors, the camera angles, the way that you shoot it, on the best way to get that piece of information across.
And then come up, and Preston will be here. We'll use Preston.
And generally, I do as many takes as I need to think that I've got what I need.
No, didn't get it then. There, one more.
22 Alpha, take 20.
Mark.
It's sometimes great to have choices too, and working with actors, it's often good to shoot multiple takes if you're not getting exactly the same thing every time, but you're getting a whole variety of different ways in which the scene's played, and then that gives you a lot of choices in the cutting room, which at the moment, you know, those choices I really appreciate.
Sorry, we'll cut that. That was a bit of a dog's breakfast.
The next question is by Rue Boyle, who says, how do you balance the special effects with the character elements in the movie? It's not a science. I mean, you don't sit thinking character, special effects, what percentage of each am I going to have? And largely the special effects are just simply an element in the storytelling. I mean, people have to wear costumes so that they look like the characters. The sets have to be built so that they represent what you want to have in the movie. Obviously, a movie like King Kong, you end up with many more special effects than you would if you were telling a modern-day drama story, simply because, you know, the nature of the story demands things on screen that you can't achieve any other way. The last question is submitted by David, and it's, why are you willing to share so much with the fans? Why are you doing things like these production diaries? Well, I can't tell you that. That's a complete secret.
I'm going to find out who is doing it. I want to find out who's in charge of the Kong is King website and where they're getting their information.
The production diaries have been something that have kind of organically evolved. If you look back at the very first production diary we ever did, the guys poked the video camera in my face and said,
Peter, could we do a quick blurb for the Kong fan site?
Sure, yeah.
And I turned around and said a very brief kind of cursory, you know, hi.
No more days till we start shooting. None.
It was only after that first night of shooting and that very first production diary that I began to realise what the potential was, that it could be kind of fun. It's a way of showing everybody what it takes to make a film in real time, so you can get a sense of the time scale involved, of how long we shot for, how long we're going to be editing for. It's just a kind of, we just thought it'd be fun thing to do the making of while we're making the movie. So hopefully that's answered a few of your questions, and we'll do some more in oncoming weeks, but we're just still cutting. There's not a lot of exciting stuff to see in the cutting room at the moment other than me lying on my couch and slowly assembling the movie.
Adrian packs up, he's got to get out of here, he's going to get him.
Yeah,
he's coming after him. That worked good.
Is that working for you?
Yeah, that works really good.
Peter will like it.
Yeah.
So at the moment it's the hard slog of cutting, and it'll continue, and you'll be watching it in future weeks. So we'll see you soon.
When we did the sums on how many miniatures there were to shoot on the film, we suddenly realised that we could be filming for another year after the film came out. So we quickly decided that we needed another miniature unit to help support Alex's team, and that new team is what we call BVH's unit, which is Brian Van Hul's unit.
During the course of the live action shoot, I was the visual effects supervisor on set, and then during post-production, whatever they need done, I usually end up having to do it, whether it's visual effects elements. Okay, we'll do that again, Dave. Or, like right now, they wanted to start a second miniature unit. They put me in charge of that unit so that I can work with Alex Funky and we can try to get through all the material in the short amount of time we have. It's Friday. Friday's easy day.
The producers talked about the number of shots that needed to be achieved to finish the show, and we were talking about 800 shots that we actually had to shoot, and whether or not we will achieve it, I don't know, but we'll have a damn good go at it.
It's a very fast unit. They shoot miniatures like crazy. Up to 20,000 feet of film in one day on one camera is quite a feat on miniatures, and they did it.
V-track back into where we had that original position.
Rolling, and Mocon is shooting.
The different passes that we'll shoot on our miniatures are a standard move length, which matches the previous cut that Peter's given to us. One that's 20% longer, so that once the final animation is finished, if he wants to lengthen the shot, he actually has those frames. We also do those versions with high wind and with low wind, and in some cases with clean atmos and with smoked up stages. You know, Mike, when you think about it, none of this would be possible without the support of cocktail napkin technology. There's all our scaling, there's our count sheet.
We have a number of different studios that we're doing things in, so we have a lot of irons going and a lot of fires.
We've got 2 motion control operators, and I'm sometimes doing 2 shots at once and jumping from one studio to the other. Plus they're shooting other components like smoke and fire elements and things randomly all over the place. So there's a lot of different stuff happening simultaneously.
Brian is a jack of all trades in that he can do anything, but he's one of the few that I know is a master of them all. He's very much like Peter in lots of ways in that he has endless bounds of energy and he wears many a hat on this project.
Oh, I have to because I'm losing my hair. You're fired. You're only really as good as the people who work for you, and we've been really lucky to get a really good collection of people from the live action unit and from the other miniatures unit and also from overseas over to help us create the second miniatures unit. Except for Mike Kelly, he's kind of crap, you know, but we stick with it anyway. Hi. Hey. Gus Hunter and Jeremy Bennett have been really essential in leading us on the actual look of things. We end up with sometimes just a sequence with previs, just black and white images and very nondescript skies and, you know, not a lot of dressing in terms of what the environment should look like. So Gus and Jeremy have been great in coming down, actually doing digi-stills of the miniatures and actually incorporating that into their concept paintings. These lines that are going across, not just having lines going across, but you see that sort of stuff in Gus's artwork. The one thing that always distinguishes the images is how it's used in a film. And that is always in context with how good the director is. There's really incredibly amazing work that people will never see in movies that just have bad stories and poor directing. You never have that problem working on Peter's films because the storytelling is there, the directing is there. So that's really the important thing about working with a good director, and luckily we happen to have one that lives in the neighborhood. So it's just up to us to apply the technology to it to make it look really cool.
Hello, here we are, 24 weeks away from the opening of the movie, and I guess this week the most exciting thing has been the release of the trailer. Certainly very exciting for us because it gives everybody a look at the movie for the first time.
Herb, get the camera.
We thought this week it would be interesting to show you the process of how this particular trailer got made. We worked very closely with a company in Los Angeles called The Ant Farm, who did the Lord of the Rings trailer. Steve Harris from The Ant Farm flew down to New Zealand and worked with us down here.
It's been really great. That's very rare. Usually the directors aren't this hands-on involved.
Well, make it so it's not a flash. It's a dissolve. It's only a dissolve from the ship to the map, and then it wouldn't have such an abrupt kind of whack at you.
I'd use that in the trailer too, because we are going to need some sort of a wide shot of the area around that town.
We'll get that going because I think that trailer's looming about 4 weeks away now. We worked on about 130 odd shots. In some instances, the miniatures weren't built.
We're building the second seawall miniature for the trailer, and the guys here have just been rushing to get it completed.
So right up until 2 weeks or a week even in some instances before delivery date, we were still shooting the miniature.
So the production of the trailer basically becomes like a mini movie. all the departments that are working on the big film, the sound department, the editorial department, the visual effects department, everybody activates and moves into high gear in order to get the trailer done.
The editing is still a little bit in flux. Pete's still working on it, but the structure is starting to come together, so we're starting to pull together some of the sounds that we're going to be using for it.
Because you want that moment where she screams and he replies with his roar to really be a moment.
Whenever things got really tough in that apartment, we just had to remind the team that, well, just think about those poor bastards at Weta.
From day to day, the shots that are in the trailer changes from 20 or 30 shots to a lot more.
We just got a new one in, and it's completely different shots than it was before, but that's okay.
Some of these shots are still in the previs stage, so they're just concepts, and nothing's done for them yet.
Probably 90% of the shots in the movie have some sort of visual effect, whether you will ever realize it or not.
One of the key decisions was how much or how little to show of Kong. We really felt very strongly that we really did want to show Kong, because King Kong has so much more to offer in its story and its themes and its character than trying to make a big mystery out of what our gorilla looks like.
You know, we're still working out what Kong looks like, and you know, and Peter wants him up on the screen. He's got to be great, and he's got to be done. So we're just hammering it into place at the last minute.
Weta have got very little time to finish off a lot of shots, but I don't think that's a problem. I think it's good to have pressure to get, you know, the creative juices flowing.
I'm working on the swamp look right now in some of the adventure sequence.
Just tonight we found out that we need to get some natives going.
Tomorrow, she'll have more shot suggestions or effect shot suggestions that will give an aneurysm to somebody somewhere.
Of course, everybody freeze frames and examines it frame by frame, minutiae, so we have to be a wee bit careful. Actually, one little interesting thing with this trailer is there's one significant shot in the trailer that's not actually in the film at all. I'm not going to say which one.
I'd say 50% of it won't be in the film, knowing Peter, the way he works. And like we shot shots for the trailer that weren't in the trailer as well.
I was really thrilled by what I saw in the trailer of Kong. I can't wait to see the final film.
I think the event of seeing what's coming on the event movies is an event unto itself.
6 months seems like a long way away.
Okay, welcome to this week's production diary. We've got now 23 weeks left to go. So now that you've seen the gathering process and you've seen us run around, record all the sounds we need, I would like to invite you inside to Park Road Post to see the next step, which is designing and editing the sounds. Okay, so just down there is the ADR recording stage.
We didn't get much of a crowd tonight, Annie.
And this is our main mixing theatre.
Come on, take me to dinner.
And this is our department.
The sound design is really made up of many layers of sounds, and we start with the smallest sounds.
Sound design is pulling sounds out of thin air. Building mass footwalla.
We'll start with a couple of simple elements for the hit of him throwing, and then a metal element. We'll have a glass element, and then it's really a matter of adding other elements for the slide past. Once you kind of put it all together, it kind of sounds like this.
We have the ability to basically take each sound and move it around the room by putting it through this control system where we can tell it what speaker to go into. So this dot basically represents the sound. Right now, I've got it playing out the center speaker, but I can move it to the right surround, left surround, back to the front left.
We're putting that right around the room, so we've got pretty much a really good quad going of creaks and moans, and and when the tram gets bashed, the tram bell also dings every now and then, which is quite funny. They also use the boat and the car drops for the tram impacts onto the vehicles and stuff like that.
It's been a fantastic day, one of the best recording days yet.
and the tram is made of wood and steel, so it gives it a believability and that size of the impact. They're pretty tough people.
When you hear this in the film, there'll be Kong effects all over it, and the crowds probably won't be anywhere near as exhausting to listen to as they are at the moment when they're totally raw, because they sound like this. You get the idea. When I finally see the scene and I see all those bits of previs have been swapped out with the real crowd, I'm familiar with it, and I can go that shot, that sound, and just whack it in, and it's going to be a bit of a sausage factory because that's the way it's looking like it's going to turn out.
We've got a pretty monstrous amount of work to get through, which is kind of appropriate given there's lots of monsters in the film. The bulk of the recording has been done, but there's still lots of little bits and pieces, and you come up with an idea and you go, oh, I want to try that. So you just sort of run away and try a particular thing. As time goes on, there'll be obviously less of that, and everyone will just get sort of hairier and sort of smellier, and we'll just get really tired and grumpy. Apart from that, it'll be great fun.
So this doesn't look like much at the moment, but this is our A stage, and we're 22 weeks out from the premiere of this film. We've just got a couple of little bits and pieces to get together for the Weta Digital guys, so come on in and we'll show you what's going on in the Elements unit.
You'd be amazed at how much film we go through on things like dirt and rocks. It's crazy.
We'll go with big rubber rocks to begin with.
And action, Phil. So this is the fascinating world of the Elements unit, and we're about trees breaking and dust blowing and rocks rolling down hills. And that will all be composited later. And action.
If you have real elements that work, that always gives you that extra bit of connection you need between digital produced stuff and the live action elements.
For example, the sequence takes place in a sort of a swampy environment, and a lot of it's sort of going to be on flat ground here. So what we can do is we can shoot sand elements being displaced by various implements, a rake or some sort of prod or a swinging pendulum that can just knock spray everywhere, and then actually isolate that element off of the blue screen and comp it into the shot, get it under his foot, get some spray coming out of the T-Rex's under his foot.
And the gorge is a bit trickier because we don't have much dust. It's sort of a humid climate. It's a lot of rock surface, so we have to be a bit more elaborate about how to make this foot contact work. Foot contact is basically one of the most crucial things in this whole sequence because you see a lot of big brown-toe feet touching the ground, stomping right in front of camera, and if you don't see any reaction to that, the audience is not going to buy it.
If you were to just look at any of these elements when they were shot, if you take a cricket bat and just whack the sand, it would just be this really small spray. Because essentially, you're talking about something maybe just an event happening that big, but if you shoot that at 48 or 60 or 72 or 96 FPS, suddenly this little spray can look like a mountain of earth being disrupted, and you actually play it off like it is coming from, Kong's foot, who could actually grab a human being, And
a lot of the times it actually looks better, We get a real looking effect, and yeah, it's quick. They can be here and have input into the look of it straight away. And, at the end of the day, they've got finished composite pieces.
I think we went into this thinking very generic because there's a whole lot of the film that hasn't even been turned over to us yet, as far as the effects are concerned. And considering the amount of stuff that we shot, hopefully we'll have enough in the bank for what's coming down the road.
So that's it. That's pretty much wraps up the Elements unit. Hopefully we've got what they need, and maybe I'll see you again in a couple of weeks. And we've got some pickups going on with our fabulous cast.
All right, here we go.
All right, what is everyone doing to get ready for pickups?
Well, we're having a meeting about what we're going to do. A department bonding thing.
It's therapy. It's good therapy.
So here we are, we're 21 weeks to go. And this week's a busy week. We're preparing for pickup shooting.
What are pickups? People walk around and we sort of do a community service, and there's a lot of rubbish around Miramar, so I'd like to help pick it up.
Pickups.
The director cut the film and then decides that he needs to add shots, change shots.
During the cutting, you come up with ideas for new scenes, you come up with little pieces of information that you want to get across to the audience. You come up with actually sometimes just better ways to tell a story or to get some information across. And so we're doing that right at the moment.
We've got 2.5 weeks. In fact, really 2 weeks.
That's to pull a team together, find out what we're doing, and find the spaces to work in, because once again we're fighting for spaces with lighting. And
hey, it's the same.
It's fun.
It's what we do.
So this is the map of Stone Street, which is basically a map that hasn't changed that much, but we kind of issue it just to let everyone know where everything is going to be. It's one gateway and everyone comes in and out. See?
Excuse
coming
us.
in and out. The one gateway. End of tomorrow it'll all be sorted. What are we shooting, mate?
Don't tell them anything. Don't give away any secrets.
Does anyone know? No one knows. That is a $100,000 question.
We have some general parameters of what we're going to be shooting, when we're going to be shooting, and where we're going to be shooting. We can fill in the rest later.
We'll find out tomorrow at 11:30. She's right, she's clever, she's smart.
Welcome back, everybody. Andy Serkis is here and able to work, so we'll do some new shots with Andy and Jimmy. It's interior Denham's cabin because we have no exterior. Do we?
No, we don't.
No.
So here we are. We have 1 week to finish building our sets before we start shooting pickups, particularly in K stage here. We're putting in the ship's hold, the native village part of, and some generic jungle.
All the sets are in storage and it's just a matter of pretty much piecing them together. Even though it's not quite that easy, but this is just for our use for continuity, so we can put things back together as they were.
We're just going through the testing phase at the moment. There's about 280 odd space lights rigged in there.
Got 6 40-foot container loads of gear coming in from overseas. 14,000 metres of wheel and cable we've got.
On top of the 170 shooting crew and makeup and wardrobe and stuff, we still have a huge, construction department, and art department, and greens department.
Pickups are good. It's more fun than making the movie.
Shane D will just go up and do a couple of checks first, like that good coordinator he is, before he throws up the disposable stunties.
At this stage we're in the process of converting one of these lovely chorus girl wigs into a Jimmy double that hopefully you will never see on the film.
We've got principal cast coming back into town, so every opportunity possible we're trying to get hold of them so we can get ADR needed for the show.
It's gone well. We made excellent progress. We did 7 pages yesterday.
You should, because there's no such thing as a slow death, see? Not at the end.
It's just basically the same team getting back together again for a couple more weeks of shooting. Being able to go back on the set and hang out with the guys and do a little bit more shooting's fun. Something to look forward to, so that's what we'll be up to come Monday morning.
We'll be doing the usual 7:30 crew calls, and there may be some overtime required. We'll warn you now, get your sleep, won't be long, we'll be over and done in 2 weeks. Then it's another party.
En route to Cloudland to take some motion pictures of little old New York that will give you a real bird's-eye view of Manhattan Island. Flying at about 1,000 feet, the skyscrapers still rise pretty high. But as we pass over lower Manhattan and swoop out across New York Bay, our plane starts climbing. Miss Liberty waves farewell.
We set in King Kong in the 1930s, but we're making it a very realistic 1930s. It's an amazing period of history. It's the darkest year of the Depression, and New York was going through this incredible period of construction. The Empire State Building had just been built, and vaudeville was in its dying days, and all of these things are touched upon in the movie. We had to create a New York that no longer exists, that hasn't existed for many, many decades.
In the early 1930s, America faced economic troubles unlike any seen before. The boom of the 1920s had been built on weak foundations. The stock market crash of October 1929 triggered a rapid decline in the economy. Within 2 years, the country was mired in the depths of the Great Depression.
The Great Depression, beginning in 1929 and lasting most of the next decade,
was the most catastrophic economic setback, certainly in the 20th century and probably in the history of the United States.
It's a seizing up of the capitalist economy. Businessmen are looking around, they're not selling their products because people can't afford them, and you get this downward spiral of swelling unemployment, and unemployment leads to homelessness, and it leads to despair, and there seems to be, by 32, 33, no bottom.
There were no accurate figures on employment and unemployment kept in the United States at the time of the Great Depression. So all we have is sort of educated guesses. But most people think it was about a third of the country unemployed. So that's an astronomically high figure.
And New York City, of course, is particularly hard hit. In 1930, there were 300,000 people out of work. By 32, there were 800,000 people out of work. By the beginning of 33, there were 1.5 million people out of work. And these were not statistics only that you were reading. These were people, and they were highly visible in a very in-your-face way.
There was a day-to-day search for work that many people had to suffer, and they didn't know when they got up in the morning whether they're going to make enough money to buy a meal by the end of the night. My father remembered my grandmother going door to door in their apartment building in the Bronx, knocking on people's doors, trying to borrow pennies so she could put together enough money to boil up some potatoes for everyone to have supper that night.
Nothing to see here. Let's go. Break it up. Let's go.
There were mass evictions all across the 5 boroughs of New York, in places like the Bronx and Brooklyn.
They were perfectly normal people who simply could not pay their rent. They had nowhere to live, nowhere to go.
And the landlord would not let them stay. So they just got the police or private security forces to evict them. So hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of families, found themselves with nowhere to live and no income.
All over the country, including in New York, as people lost their homes, they needed to live someplace. And you got shanty towns, and in a kind of derisive naming of them, they were often called Hoovervilles.
Mocking the president, Herbert Hoover, because he seemed unable to do anything to stop the Depression.
The worst, most primitive shanty towns you could ever imagine seeing anywhere in the world today, they existed in New York.
Those places tended to be in the parks, and they tended to be along the waterfront, which was really just kind of in industrial areas, warehouses, very often refuse dumps, literally garbage dumps.
Hoovervilles could be found in many parts of the city. I think the one that got the most attention was the one that grew up in Central Park.
And there you had the Hooverville, this town of shanties spreading through Central Park, right next to Fifth Avenue. And the people who lived in the glittering apartment houses of Fifth Avenue could look out of their windows into this scene of horrible, horrible deprivation and privation.
I mean, it's amazing when you see photographs of this rundown shed and shanty town that's been built, and each one has a little garden outside.
A couple of the people who moved in were construction workers, and they were pretty handy. Some of these shacks were actually fairly elaborate affairs.
They're trying to behave in the most civilized way they can in a very uncivilized time, a very desperate time of their lives.
Unemployment was brutal to people in the early years of the Depression because there was no safety net for them to fall back on.
Well, there had been in America really not a great tradition of relief. That was a kind of a foreign idea to the United States. But the Great Depression was so unprecedented a disaster that even in America we had to do something.
People's suffering led to the formation of private and city-run bread lines and soup kitchens.
Soup kitchens had thousands of people who lined up. So this was very widespread, and by the way, it very quickly bankrupted these charities. So they had a hard time continuing to operate these, and many of them closed.
The soup kitchen lines are an incredible mix of people who are not just homeless and down on their luck and poor, but actually regular Joes in their suits who've probably been out pounding the pavements looking for work, can't find work, and they haven't eaten because they just don't have any money.
There were a lot of political responses to the Great Depression, inevitably, and radicalism in particular had this great upsurge. A lot of people felt the solution was in socialist or communist solutions, and there were great riots and parades and demonstrations of all kinds, and very often turning into melees because they were being put down by the police, who were very conservative, did not like to see these kind of attacks, as they saw it, on the American way of life.
The low point of the Depression in New York was 1932, 1933. It was when the economy was at its lowest point, there was the least amount of employment opportunity. But beyond that, the initial efforts at providing some relief and help for those facing these kinds of crises were beginning to fail.
There was still little sign of concrete relief for ordinary working people. People still felt bleak, insecure. The future was very uncertain.
So, you know, when you're getting 2 and 3 years into the Depression, it no longer simply looks like a bad business cycle. People are beginning to think, hey, maybe this is the way the future is just going to be indefinitely, and the resources to cope with it were failing. So it was quite a grim moment.
Ann Darrow is a vaudeville actress in New York.
Vaudeville was a variety show, a string of acts put together to form a complete bill of entertainment. It emerged in the 1880s, and from the 1880s through the 1920s, it was the most popular form of theater in America.
These people, these vaudevillians, they would put their heart and soul into everything, blood, sweat, and tears. And, you know, we do as actors today, but we get paid. These guys, they were going back to the dormitory at the end of the day and the soup line, and they did it because they loved it.
Vaudeville was great because it tapped the energy of thousands of street corner wise guys, acrobats, and dancers who grew up all over New York, and young men and women who grew up in small towns across America and wanted to be big and knew that to be big in vaudeville, they had to be big in New York and play the Palace.
Oh my, he is making a of me.
With the influx of, especially in New York, of immigrants, you saw the rise of an extraordinary melting pot of different performance styles.
There might be an act with trick dogs. You can enjoy that if you're an immigrant in the year 1900, whether or not you speak English.
These weren't highfalutin shows, this wasn't Broadway, but the talent in some of these places was extraordinary. It could be a mix of Chinese opera singers to Jewish comedians to Italian tap dancers, believe it or not, Italian tap dancers.
There was a man called Eugene Sandow, and he was a muscle man, and he would appear on stage doing poses as a classical statue. Well, this was basically a beefcake show for proper middle-class women who were shopping in downtown New York in the middle of the day, and with all honesty go home and say, well, I watched a show on physical culture at the Vaudeville House today.
There was a guy who was legend for his sneezes, which we've sort of incorporated into the film. Or it could be something as strange as regurgitation. That's one of my favourites. People who could regurgitate anything. So they could drink a glass of water, then drink some kerosene and start a fire and then regurgitate the water and put the fire out. It was amazing. I really wish I could have seen some of this stuff. Some people became incredibly famous who came up through vaudeville, like James Cagney and Jimmy Durante and Buster Keaton.
Bob Hope, George Burns, Eddie Cantor.
Her poor father, he died of throat trouble. They hung him.
They learned how to appeal to an audience, they learned how to tell jokes that caught the temper of the times, and they brought those skills from the vaudeville stage into television, into radio, into film, and it made them much better performers.
Ironically, one of the reasons vaudeville in 1933 was starting to peter out was the rise of movies, and sound had been introduced with Al Jolson and the Jazz Singer. A lot of theatres were getting converted, especially in New York, from vaudeville theatres, the great playhouses, into moving picture theatres.
The larger salaries demanded by entertainers with the advent of radio and pictures had much to do with the slow but steady collapse. New York Times, October 16th, 1932.
When the Depression came, it really kicked the legs out from underneath vaudeville.
You hear about how in Depression era or whenever there's a recession that the one thing that always stays strong is entertainment, and that you know, the actors are all working, everything's fine. Not true. Not all the actors were doing fine. A lot of them couldn't find work like everybody else.
Hey! Merry
A lot of companies that had been established and been performing together for many, many years were being shut down and were basically disbanding.
New York grew up as a port. That's why New York exists in the first place, as a trading center. And although many other layers of life were added on that, New York always remained one of the great ports of the world. And certainly in the 1930s, the port, the harbor, maritime life defined a lot of the economics, the culture, the feel of the city.
It built its greatness as a seaport on its natural advantages. It had a great harbor, protected from the storms of the Atlantic Ocean.
It's very rarely blocked by ice. There's not that much fog.
It also had an inland waterway up the Hudson River, up to New York State, then across the Erie Canal to the Great Lakes to the west. It made New York City, since the 19th century, the great American port.
Being a port city made New York very polyglot. You had people from all over the world working on boats that came into New York, that left New York. They brought culture, they brought language, they brought disease, they brought ideas.
The sailors who lived in New York and shipped out or came here on other vessels from abroad made New York a cosmopolitan place, a city where different languages, different ideas, different politics were all part of everyday life.
You could get Chinese food in New York, you could get French and Italian and German and Mexican food in New York. You couldn't in most cities in the United States get anything like that.
Half of all the value of shipped goods from the whole country went through the port of New York, and that involved sailors, it involved tens of thousands of longshoremen who loaded and unloaded the ships. It also involved teamsters who drove trucks that then picked up the stuff at the docks, railway workers, warehouse workers.
Longshoremen lived in neighborhoods like Chelsea and the West Village because their work was right near there. The wharves were right on the edge of the city, especially in Manhattan.
You look at the aerial shots from 1933 and Manhattan was just bristling with wharves. It was like hair almost, you know, it's like all the way around the outer periphery of the island was the coming and going of ships from all around the world.
You would see every kind of boat you could possibly imagine. You'd see some huge, freighters and very big and sleek passenger boats, but you'd see lots of local boats that just operated in the harbor.
There's passenger ferries that are going back and forth from the various boroughs. There's garbage scows, there's police launches. So, it looks like the harbor is still this kind of cacophonous, thriving area. But in fact, underneath that, there are 20,000 sailors who are unemployed and stranded in the city.
The port was as impacted by the Great Depression as anywhere else, and the number of imports and the number of exports dramatically declined, and many, many dock workers were thrown out of work like everyone else. The piers themselves went into disuse and were often turned over into places where people just tried to survive as best they could, so it was not a pretty story along the docks of New York.
In the beginning of the 1930s, New York in some ways was a lot like it is today. It was a very large city, almost 7 million people, by far the largest city in the country. Very dynamic, very dense.
It was a chaotic, crazy, busy city, bustling and vibrant. The streets are absolutely jam-packed with cars, with trams, with buses, and thousands of people.
The streets were crowded with hawkers and people selling things, not just newsagents and hot dog vendors, but selling apples, selling clothes, and also people walked everywhere.
New York did not change much with the automobile revolution. It didn't change its physical structure. So in the early 1930s, you had a city built for horse-drawn transportation that now had hundreds of thousands of cars in it.
Of course, you had the great subway system. Most of it was complete by 1930, which, unlike any other city in the world, ran 24 hours a day, never stopped. And it was carrying something like 6 million people a day. Unbelievable.
And of course, you have the trolleys, and the trolleys ran on tracks, metal tracks, that were in the streets. They were quite slippery, especially if they were wet. So you'd have these kind of slippery trolley tracks, horses, pedestrians, cars. It could get pretty chaotic and pretty dangerous, too, if you're trying to cross the street. The elevated railroads were in their last days when the 30s began. They made the streets beneath them dark. They were kind of noisy. So real estate values were much lower on the avenues that had these L's, and people were more reluctant to build new buildings in them. And then once the subway system began expanding, they became somewhat redundant, so the decision was made to take most of them down.
From 1920 to 1933, it was illegal to purchase, manufacture, or distribute alcoholic beverages in the United States, a period known as Prohibition.
It was part of the Depression-era landscape for sure. And we have one of the sequences at the beginning of the movie where the police are busting up a illegal still.
There's also Carl Denham gets a box of whiskey to take on his trip, and it's labelled lemonade. So there's a little hint that you would know that Prohibition was taking place.
Quite remarkably, in 1919, the American people decided that they wanted to outlaw liquor, and the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, the Prohibition Amendment, went into effect.
During the 1920s, there was a great schism in the United States. You might say it was kind of the red state, blue state schism that we have today, except in those days it was what was called the wets versus the dries. And the dries believed in prohibition. They believed that selling alcohol was immoral and should be illegal, and they won.
They thought that if you passed this one all-purpose reform, it would wipe out crime, it would lift the morals, the standards of the country, and also, honestly, there were a lot of people in the countryside who saw this as an attack on the big cities, and particularly the immigrant culture of places like New York City.
Within hours of the passing of the law, the first speakeasies began to arise. And they were basically illegal bars where you could buy a drink until the police came and tried to shut it down. And then the speakeasy would open in another location a little while later, or they'd buy the police off.
The police commissioner, Grover Whalen, in 1927 or 28, estimated that there were 32,000 speakeasies operating in the city of New York.
And thus a whole system of corruption and law-breaking. People who had previously been law-abiding suddenly became lawbreakers because everybody wanted to drink.
The problem was that while law enforcement, which was, bribed to colossal levels, was pretty ineffective at sort of curtailing this, there were a lot of breakdowns and struggles over market share between rival gangster groups, but they didn't negotiate with salesman sessions, they did it with Thompson submachine guns.
While these newly wealthy big city gangsters supported Prohibition, arrayed against them were a variety of wets, led by New York Governor Al Smith.
And when Governor Smith ran in 1928 for president, he ran on a platform that was to repeal Prohibition. And that was one of the things he was attacked for across in the sort of farm belt states of America. This evil guy from New York State and New York City who was going to bring back those evil bars and, nightclubs and liquor and so forth.
Smith was resoundingly beaten by Herbert Hoover in 1928, but Prohibition's days were numbered. By the spring of 1933, Congress allowed for the sale of 3.2% beer.
On April 6, 1933, when the Budweiser truck pulled up in front of the Empire State Building, pulled by large, gorgeous Clydesdale horses, there to greet the first case of beer in New York was Al Smith, the man who really had done more than anybody else to bring about the end of Prohibition.
I got a real thrill when I saw the 6 big horses coming along with the wagon load of beer. The only regret I have is that it isn't all for me.
And finally, with the ratification of the 21st Amendment, Prohibition was over.
On December 5, 1933, America could celebrate with a drink when the 36th state, Utah, adopted the 21st Amendment, repealing Prohibition.
The end of Prohibition, oddly enough, happens during our film as well, although it's not on camera.
So you may see some liquor advertising, in the end of the film that wasn't there at the beginning.
When Merian C. Cooper first devised King Kong, he was going to be not using the Empire State Building because the Empire State Building didn't exist. He went from the Woolworth building, the Chrysler building, and by the time Kong actually was greenlit and in production at the studio, the Empire State Building had only just been opened. It was opened just months before King Kong started photography.
In the late 1920s, the title of the tallest building in the world shifted rapidly. In New York City, skyscraper construction was booming.
The mid-1920s in New York City was a period of phenomenal construction. Some people call it the jazz age, but it was really the skyscraper age.
What you had in the 20s real estate boom was in fact a competitive race to throw more and more buildings up, downtown and midtown. And this became symbolized by the very end of the decade between two particular buildings who were like the heavyweight contenders for the title. There was the Chrysler building in Midtown, and there was the Bank of the Manhattan Company down in Wall Street. And they wanted, both of them, to sort of win the title of the tallest structure in the world away from the Woolworth building, which at that point held the heavyweight crown.
Both buildings soared upwards, until finally the Bank of the Manhattan building topped off, apparently the winner.
And then the Chrysler people spring the surprise, because inside the tower they have constructed this steel spike, and after summoning all of the PR people and the newspapers and whatnot, they raise the thing as if the building is kind of stretching itself, and it soars up another 185 feet, and not only does it overshadow now the Bank of the Manhattan Company, but it overshadows even the Eiffel Tower at 1,000 feet, the tallest structure in the world up to that point.
But even before the Chrysler building was completed, a new skyscraper was being planned.
At that point, before the crash, a collection of extremely rich people decided that they were going to trump both of these buildings and build the tallest building in the world.
The primary economic financial mover behind the Empire State Building was a man named John Jacob Raskob, who was a very close friend of Al Smith's.
Raskob has bankrolled a lot of Al Smith's campaign in 1928, which of course was a disaster, and he lost badly to Hoover. Smith, after this campaign, in fact, is no longer governor. He's got no job prospects, and Raskob says, "You, Mr. Smith, are going to be the president of the Empire State Corporation." Smith is deliriously happy.
The Empire State Building project was a kind of consolation prize for losing the campaign for the presidency in 1928.
The Empire State Building was going to be 86 floors tall.
And they originally had a plan for a flat top at 1,000 feet. But then the Chrysler building did its kind of little spire, and uh-oh. So Raskob suggested, okay, let's add a 200-foot mooring mast. Dirigibles are still viable at that point.
So instead of having to go to New Jersey, which was where the dirigibles like the Hindenburg hooked up, you would be able to connect to them on the top of the tallest building in the world in Midtown Manhattan.
Amidst air currents that were, ferocious. So it was a crazy idea, but it was an excuse. And in fact, aesthetically, it was very pleasing, much better than the flat top thing.
Demolition of the old Waldorf Astoria Hotel began on October 1st, 1929. The stock market crashed 4 weeks later.
But it's too late. They are committed to this project, so the only way out is forward or up. It's an enormously complicated project. Just apart from big. But they do a breathtaking job with incredible speed, almost a floor a day.
It's an unbelievable feat of engineering and construction.
And they do this by prefabricating the material, the spandrels, the mullions, the steel girders, all sort of assembled off-site to precise specifications.
They managed to get the steel from the steel works to the building site and craned up to the top of the building, and the steelwork was still warm.
The Empire State Building's construction is really the great construction story of the 20th century as far as buildings go. From the first inkling of the investors who thought, well, we want to build a great tower, to the opening day was only 20 months' time, a record of achievement that I think will never be challenged.
At opening of Empire State Building, Smith, with wife and 2 grandchildren, is again in limelight. Grandchild gleefully cuts ribbon to lobby doors, and then Al Smith, president of Empire State Building, opens door to public.
They get the building completed exactly on target, May 1st, 1931, open for business. But there's no business. The city commercial market has been wildly overbuilt, and this now dumps a massive amount more. In fact, when they open, there's 72% vacancy rate.
It didn't actually reach full occupancy until the 50s. And it actually turns out that in its early years, the Empire State Building made more money from people going up to the observation tower than it did from renting out space inside the building. But what they would do is they would turn on groups of lights on the floors of the building, different times and different weeks, to make it look like it was occupied.
The vacancy rate was so appalling, and it was such a public fact, that it popularly became known as the Empty State Building.
With time, the Empire State Building became the most well-known skyscraper in the world and the great defining building of New York City.
In 1933, New York had a completely different skyline than it does today. I mean, the Empire State Building had just been finished, and it was the tallest building in the world, which I think is the thing that really caught the imagination of people early on. Most people alive at that time had not had that experience. They'd never gone to the top of a skyscraper and seen what a city looked like from that vantage point.
Well, what do you think of the sight of Greater New York from the 86th floor of the Empire State Building?
That's the highest I've ever been.
Highest for me, too. Probably as high as I'll ever be.
The Empire State Building is a beautiful building, and I think that's a little piece of why it's so iconic for New York and for the whole world. The fact that it emerged during this difficult time that seemed to show that we could still do great things.
The Empire State Building became this totem. The image that we all have is of this huge ape on top of it, that King Kong belonged to the Empire State Building, the Empire State Building belonged to King Kong.
A European man came to America and he said New York seemed to be a city built by giants for giants. Well, King Kong was the giant, and when he got to the top, at least for a few minutes, he was the king. It was the most powerful connection, I think, between a structure and a city and a fictional character that the 20th century had ever seen.